Hi, folks. Welcome to Nature Nova Scotia March Nature Talks. This talk is about wildlife stewardship tips, specifically actions that communities can take to help wildlife and most common wildlife-human interaction, hope for wildlife response to. This is our monthly talks, and we do this on the first Tuesdays of every month with a rotating team. And this month is Tips for Wildlife Stewardship with Hope for Wildlife. We are so lucky tonight, folks, to be joined by Dr. Hope Swinimer, the founder and director of the Hope for Wildlife Society in Seaforth, Nova Scotia. She began working with the Nova Scotia government in 1996 to develop a wildlife rehabilitation license. And since then, the Hope for Wildlife Society has helped more than 75,000 native Nova Scotia species be rescued. Dr. Swinimer recently received an honorary doctorate from Swinimer University for her work with wildlife. And in 2019, she worked to install more than 109 solar panels. The Hope for Wildlife facility completely dependent on solar energy. Every year, Dr. Swinimer and her team respond to more than 30,000 emergency wildlife calls, care for more than 6,500 patients, and welcome visitors to Hope for Wildlife facility to show the public the importance of wildlife rehabilitation and living harmoniously with our natural world. Hope for Wildlife volunteer will be joining us. He will introduce of Hope for Wildlife educational birds of prey and discuss their natural history and why they come into the province. So folks, if you have any questions, please send it in the chat and we will try our best to answer your questions. I'm here today alone. My coordinator have another presentation, so I will do my best to get to your question as quickly as possible. We will be muting everyone so there's no disruption during the presentation. That said, if you're new here, folks, I will make sure there's some information about Nature Nova Scotia and how you can get involved with nature talks in the future. I am so excited for this presentation tonight because I love wildlife and nature. I think it is important that people learn how to live comfortably with nature in connecting with wildlife and a good steward of nature because everything is all connected in a way. Therefore, I'm looking forward to learning more tips about wildlife stewardship, folks. So Dr. Swinimer, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to Hope for Wildlife, and we can go right into your presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be here. And I always welcome the opportunity to talk about Hope for Wildlife, to let people know what it is we do and what we're all about. It's been a labor of love for over 25 years now since we started Hope for Wildlife Society. And it really all started, it wasn't really planned. A lot of it had to do with my job. At the time, I worked at a veterinary hospital and I had a keen interest in our natural world. So people used to call in all the time, you know, a bird just hit my window, what should I do? The cat just brought home a songbird, what do I need to do to help? And it just grew from there. So what started as maybe 15 or 20 animals a year has now turned into close to 7,000 a year in our last year that we just completed. So there. So this talk today is a little bit different than what we normally talk about, because I was asked to really focus on how to be a good steward of our natural world and really focus in on birds too. So one of the things I always tell people is welcome gardens, welcome weeds, throw away your lawnmower. We really don't need all that green grass. It's just kind of a desert for the natural world. By producing a habitat that's conducive for nature to live comfortably in is one of the nicest things you can do for nature. Our mission, I think it's really important that you understand our mission. And it's connecting people to wildlife in a positive way through knowledge and understanding. And whenever I'm faced with a really difficult decision or have something that's difficult to deal with, I'll always go back to my mission, and it really helps me with my decision-making process. This is a photo that I love to show because to me, the look on that little girl's face sort of sums up what we're all about. And it's to rebuild those connections between people and nature. It was interesting, about 3 years ago, I had a call from a young lady, then she wanted me to book a talk to come talk to her naturalist group. So we set up the dates and took all the information, we booked the talk. And just before I hung up, she said to me, you know, I met you once. And I said, really? When did we meet? And the lady on the other end of the phone was the little girl in this photo. And she was in her 20s when she called me. And she said she remembered that day and that connection she had with that little skunk in this photo. And it just goes to show you that the effect that connecting with nature in some way has such a strong impact on how you think of nature as you mature and age. So Hope for Wildlife is located out in Seaforth, Nova Scotia. This is an aerial photo before I even purchased the property. It was an old farmstead. And this is the way it looked when I first bought it. So it had a lot of old buildings and it was in rough shape, to say the least, but I knew it was going to be the perfect place to do the work that I wanted to do. This was about 10 years in. And we, we had our flight cages built by then. We had our white-tailed deer unit set up. But this is a more current photo of the way we look now, and it certainly has grown. If you look carefully on the left, I'll move my cursor, you see, on this side of the driveway is where we have our education facilities. So we invite people in to have tours, and they can learn about what it is we do and why we do it. And as you go up the hill, you'll come to this big, beautiful new building here. And this is what we call Fenton Farmhouse. And inside here on the basement level, we have a number of things. We have a place for interns that can stay and live. We have our offices. We have a bit of a nursery for our baby seal pups and that kind of thing. The middle floor is where we have all of our nurseries. So in the summer, when it's busy, that area is just chock-a-block full of babies. And the top is where I live. So my home is right here at Hope for Wildlife. As you go further up the hill, we have our ICU, our intensive care, where animals go that need daily medications, daily bandage changes, maybe daily fluids and physiotherapy and that kind of stuff. Back down at the bottom of the hill is our hospital, and that we're very lucky to have a doctor come in from the University of Guelph, and they sign up and they stay here for a full year and they learn about wildlife medicine. So right now we have a doctor that had her own veterinary practice for 31 years, and she decided to retire and come here and do a year internship. So we're very, very fortunate to have her. And we also have our white-tailed deer holding units. And some of the areas that don't show is our flight cage. And this is a new unit that we put in. It's huge, and it's marine units for all the marine animals, everything from seal pups to otters to ducks and geese, all the kinds of things that need that water to become strong and healthy and grow into adulthood before they get ready for the release back to the wild. We have great flight cages. One is over 100 feet long. It's about 25 feet wide and 30 feet high, higher in some places, and because we're on a hill here at Hope for Wildlife. And it's a great area for the birds after they've healed, after those broken bones are mended, to go out and exercise and get full flight, to work their muscles to get ready for freedom. So a lot of people aren't really sure what it is we do at Hope for Wildlife, but to me, it's really three components. So the first component is education. And although all three components are equally important, I really feel education is what's going to bring about the most change to our wildlife world. So the education of our children and the general public regarding the importance of conservation of the various wildlife species and the ecosystems that sustain them. We do education in lots of different ways, from the very young to the old. And I love this photo. This lady here was my grandmother, and she was 101 in that photo. And I think I learned from her well through my life. She had a passion for the natural world, for her flower gardens, for all living things. She had a great deal of respect and love for that world. And I remember I'd go and visit her and she would always say, well, didn't you bring anything to show me? Didn't you bring a living creature for me to see? And she'd be very disappointed if I didn't have something with me from the wild world. And she never lost that sparkle in her eye or that love for nature and other living things. We have events every year. And again, we haven't been able to have our open house for the last 2 years because of COVID, but we have scheduled our open house this year. Write the date on your calendar. It's going to be September 10th from 12 till 4. And we're really looking forward to getting back together. It's the only day of the year that we open up everything to the public. So you get to see behind the scenes, you get to see the nurseries, you get to see the ICU, you get to see the hospital. Everything is open and you get to tour the whole facility on that one day a year. We do have some education animals here at Hope for Wildlife, and we have George with us today. In a little bit, he's going to be introducing one of our education animals. He's got about 3 to show us today. So in a few minutes, he'll be up with one of our education critters. We're very careful when we pick an education animal here at Hope for Wildlife. A lot of criteria has to be met before we'd even consider keeping a wild animal in captivity. Our whole mission here is getting these animals back out to the wild. So the odd time we might have a bird with a missing wing or a fox that has eye injuries or an injured leg. And if they're comfortable in captivity and if we can give them a proper lifestyle, enrichment, and a proper kind of enclosure, we do consider taking them on at our facility for education purposes. I like to mention that we're always looking for students and volunteers. We have a great internship program here in the summer where students come and they spend 16 weeks and they learn everything there is to know about wildlife rehabilitation. I put this picture in on purpose because I wanted people to understand it is very hard work and it's a lot of cleaning, and that kind of thing, but it is there's a lot of joy to it. And there's sadness too, because we do see a lot of death. But it is an experience that you'll remember forever, and you'll probably make friendships that you will keep for your whole life. We do handle a tremendous number of calls from the public. This year alone, we received over 30,000 phone calls. And they really are questions on how, should I get involved? Does this animal need rescuing? And in this photo is a perfect example. I get hundreds of calls every year on seals that are maybe newborns or older, and they're just up on the beach resting. What a lot of people don't realize is that seals are semi-aquatic, so they spend about a third of their life on shore. They love to come on shore and rest. They like the sun, they like to dry out. So it's perfectly normal to see them up on shore, maybe 2 or 3 days at a time, resting and taking it easy. But when callers call, we ask certain questions like, what do the eyes look like? Are they clear? Are they pussy and goopy or stuck together? Is there any nasal discharge? Do you see any open wounds? Does he look alert? There's all kinds of things that we can talk people through. And now with cell phones, we can get a picture and we can do a really good assessment on these animals to know whether they need rescuing or if they're perfectly healthy. And of course, this little guy is a perfectly healthy little harbor seal. We have a learning center that people come up in and visit. That part of the facility is going to we're going to open again on April 2nd from 12 to 3 on every Saturday. So we'll see how that goes now that some of the restrictions have been lifted. We also do lots of tours and have lots of kids groups in. And we also go into the school system and we do a lot of education work that way too. So I'm going to introduce George now. He's all ready and he has a special guest for you. Let's do that.
Hopefully this will work. Yeah. Can't guarantee that Ariel will always look in your direction. But this is a good friend of mine, Ariel. Ariel, let's do this. So this is what happens. They tell actors never work with children and animals, I guess. So Ariel's a good friend of mine. She's a barred owl. She's been with us since about 2016. She came in with an older wing injury on the right-hand side here that was probably from being hit by a car. Unfortunately, we couldn't save the wings, so she has a partial amputation, and she does not fly really anymore, but she can do a good flutter hop. Most of the raptor species like Ariel that we get are hit by cars. It's pretty common, especially barred owls. They're not very nimble flyers. They like to glide in to catch their food, and they take it from the ground. If you ever see a barred owl try to change direction mid-flight, it's not the most graceful thing you ever seen. It's not quite like the falcons and the accipiters that have a lot of good mobility. She's seen something. What are you doing? What are you doing? There you go. Say hi to everybody. No, let's say this one. Don't say hi to Hope. You already know Hope. Yeah. So the most common species of owl we have, you might think that Ariel is a big animal, but she's really quite not. The barred owls don't migrate. They stay here all year round. So they have quite a large, puffy sort of mass of feathers underneath their flight feathers here that keep them warm in the winter. So that makes them look a little bit bigger than they normally are. Also, owls like Ariel here are night hunters. She's mostly active at night, and you can tell because she has the dark eyes. She's not doing much during the day. Owls that have light eyes tend not to hunt during the nighttime because obviously if you've got big bright light eyes at night, kind of gives you away a little bit when you come in to hunt. So she's gonna do most of her hunting at night and primarily with her ears. She's a very orally oriented hunter. And her hearing is about so good, she can hear a mouse maybe about half a soccer field away. So she got pretty good ears. So what does that mean? That means that if you're listening for your food, you have to be very quiet when you fly. So all of her feathers are designed, you notice they're not making the flappy, flappy sound that ducks make when I do this. They're very, very soft feathers. They're very, very fluffy feathers so that she doesn't make any real noise. But that makes her look a lot bigger than she is. So if I were to find her neck, and I keep going all the way in here, I'm sorry, can I do it from this side? Let's see if I can do this. That's neck all the way in there. She only weighs about 300 to 400 grams. She's a very small animal. Most of her is pectoral muscles here, the breast muscles that drive flight. And her skull is only about another third bigger than her eyes. Her eyes are about 2/3 of her skull. So if you were looking at her, if you had eyes the same size, they'd be like this big. So why do we get a lot of raptors hit by cars? In Ariel's case, and the case of most of our hawks, they take from the ground. They don't take from the air like most falcon species do. They will pick birds off in the air. They like to have a nice glide plane in. The accipiters are a little bit more nimble. They have longer tail feathers, so they can do a little bit more maneuverability. But she's going to like to sit mid-tree level over an expanse normally in nature, over a meadow or alongside of a lake. Try to find what she wants to go get. She's going to glide down, take it, run off with it somewhere. So the problem we have is that our roadways are great glide paths for our birds of prey. We cut the trees back so that we can see animals coming, so that the roads don't freeze as easily in the winter. But that makes a nice visual path for them. They can see kilometers up the road even, and they can fly down and grab whatever they want, but they don't understand vehicles very well. And they don't actually have to be hit by the vehicle to be injured. A truck going by at 120 kilometers an hour creates a lot of turbulence behind it. So even if Ariel is smart enough to sort of duck in behind the vehicle, it still might spin her, it still might fracture her fragile bones. So she still might end up coming to us. Roadkill attracts a lot of birds of prey. Roadkill attracts a lot of other animals that birds of prey want to eat. So one of the primary ways that we can try to eliminate these kind of interactions is to eliminate the amount of garbage that we throw out of our cars and to find ways to prevent animals from getting on the roads in the first place. So we can figure out how to do that. I think we've been on our way to protecting some of our birds of prey. Okay. Good. All right, say goodbye. Say goodbye, Ariel. No, that way. It's very good.
Yeah. Can you remind me how to get back into this?
Ariel knows.
Okay. Share screen. And then here we are. Good. Okay, everybody. So remember how we said education was the first of the 3 goals that we have here at Hope World. The second is the actual rehabilitation work itself. So rehabilitating animals to get them back out into the wild. In 2021, we had over 7,000 patients. And of those 7,000, 4,690 were birds. So it just shows you that's, I think, about 68% of what we get in are birds. And now I'm going to share with you some of the reasons we get these animals so that we can come up with ideas and ways that we can prevent it from happening to begin with. There are three main reasons that we get all of our wildlife, birds and mammals combined. These next three reasons I'm going to give you are those main reasons. They're so close together in numbers that I wouldn't put any of them at the top of the list. But window strikes and city lights are a real cause for injury to our natural world. We don't realize that when a bird sees the reflection of a tree in the window, that they don't know that that's not the forest there waiting for them, and it causes collisions and serious damage. We get a lot of calls on window strikes. We recommend to the public, when a bird hits your window, to, if you can, protect him from predators, because he's probably going to be stunned for a while, and put him in a safe place for that time. Sometimes I recommend, putting him in a cardboard box. It's always the best to hold a bird in because they won't damage their feathers. Wait about 3/4 of an hour. And if he doesn't come around from that impact, then give us a call, get the bird into us, and we will give him the medical care he needs. He could have all kinds of problems. A broken bone is usually what we see. Also, when birds migrate, they go through a lot of cities, a lot of towns. The lights in the big city buildings the birds that migrate travel through at night. A lot of times they do their traveling, and they use the stars to guide them. But it's been proven that the lights of a big town or city can distract them and confuse them. And so all of these birds on their migratory flight can come into the cities and crash into these big buildings with lights. And it's a real problem. There's lots of things that we can do. If you have that problem at home, there's things that you can buy for your window, anti-window strike kits. And they can be anything from just dots that are 2 to 3 inches apart to actual decals that you can put on your window. We sell some at our gift shop here. That we have some that you can't really see them, but a bird sees different than a human. So if you put them on your window, they're not going to block your view, but they will alert the bird to the glass that's there. And there's other ones that are pretty to look at and nice to put on your window, and they really do help out the birds. So it's something to really check out if you're having this problem with your windows at home. There's also a really good website. It's called FLAP, F-L-A-P, Fatal Light Awareness Program.org. And it gives you lots of good tips on things you can do to help with this situation. So number 2 are hit by cars, as George has already filled us in a little bit about. We get a lot of injured wildlife that has been struck and injured. A lot of people will stop and go and check that animal to make sure that it is dead, or if it's still alive, to get it in for help. It's always important to check. And sometimes, even though the mom may have died, you'll often see a little baby that's curled up with the mother that was hit, and that can come into us for help also. There's a wonderful group called Watch for Wildlife. And again, they have a whole lot of great ideas of how to prevent hit by cars. Everything from, they're very simple things, but sometimes you need to stop and review them. But, slowing down 5 kilometers is enough sometimes to avoid that collision with an animal. Or, being very careful at dawn and dusk, because that's when there's more animals out there moving about. So it is a good time to stop and slow down and watch. I like this particular picture. It's in the Netherlands, and I know Nova Scotia has a few tunnels and bridges now. I think we have 2, maybe 3. And they're really allowing wildlife to travel safely over these roads. It makes a huge difference. They learn to use these pathways very well. It prevents fragmentation of wildlife, gives the wild animals a better chance to exist with each other, and a safe place to cross highways. So it would be nice if we could do more and more of that, because it truly makes a difference. And it not only saves the life of the wild animals, it can save the life of human beings too, with a lot less accidents due to road collisions. Number 3 is domestic animals. The numbers are staggering of how many songbirds are destroyed sometime by domestic animals. So we get a lot of calls on, a cat. My cat just brought me home a present, a songbird, and it's still alive. What should I do? Now, with cat bites, they need to come in right away because a cat's mouth carries a lot of bacteria. So that bird that has been injured, even if you can't see a puncture wound, that puncture wound can heal up in like 5 minutes from the time it takes place. So that bird needs to come in as soon as possible to get on antibiotics right away because that cat bite is pretty fatal. So, millions of birds are destroyed through this, and there's lots of things we can do to help. Everybody loves their pet cat, and cats do like the outdoor world. So I always recommend building a beautiful catio, which is just an outside holding unit for the cat. They can go out in the sunshine and enjoy the fresh air and the beautiful summer days. And it gives the cat stimulation. It helps with their boredom and that kind of thing too. And it keeps the cat safe, which is a really big problem. Cats often are hit by cars, get in fights with other cats, get in fights with nature and wildlife. So offering the cat this outdoor experience without getting in trouble is a really good alternative for our natural world and for our kitty cats. We also see a lot of wildlife in, sometimes they're poisoned, sometimes they're oiled. And you can see by this gull, he's a terrible mess. And people think when they hear oiled wildlife, they think of, illegal dumping of bilge oil out at sea and seabirds getting in that. Now, it's true, we do see some wildlife for that reason, but living where we do, we see more wildlife that has fallen into vats of cooking oil from restaurants. So when the restaurant gets done with their cooking oil, they might put it outside and forget to put the cover on it. And we get loads of birds that like the smell of that and think it's food and get in and become a terrible mess. Very hard to get off a bird, but through certain techniques that we've learned over the years, we're able to clean these birds and get them back out into the wild. But we also are a city that is allowed to put poison out. And we always know when there's been poison put out because our phone goes crazy. We get hundreds of calls. And, the thing with poison, it's a terrible death. You'll see the birds convulsing or having seizures or stargazing, and that's when their head goes back and they're looking up at the stars. And it usually results in death unless we can get them in right away. But also if these birds die and another predator comes along and eats them, they die too. And by putting the poison in our ecosystem, like if it wasn't eaten and it rains, that goes into our streams and our lakes and our waterways. So, I think things that we might be able to do is talk to our local politicians and see if we can get at least some of the poison out of the picture, because it is used in the cities quite a bit to help with rodent control. And then if some of our birds of prey are moving into the cities, then they can become poisoned too by eating those rats. We also see a lot of human garbage. There's a little pigeon that got his face into some sticky situation there, and it was very hard to get off and cleaned. We see them with all kinds of garbage, everything from fishing lines, fishing hooks, the sticky traps that sometimes people put out for rodent control. Every year we get hummingbirds or small songbirds that have been stuck on these sticky traps, and they're really, really hard to get off. They're really not a good death. They're a horrid, horrid death. Sometimes if you have old barbed wire fences still up on your property, we get calls where birds of prey or just even mammals get caught in these fences and they need to be cut free. One thing that we see a lot that's really disturbing that I wished we could fix is our city has many, many storm drains. And when the mother duck hatches her babies and she takes them towards the lake, if she walks across one of those storm drains with her babies, they all fall down in through. So we get dozens and dozens of calls, and often the city will help us and they'll go take those grates off, and someone has to climb down the storm drain to rescue the little ducklings. But if you just think of how many hundreds of them fall down when no one is looking, it really is disturbing to think how much of our wildlife goes down into these storm drains. We also should think when we go to do our landscaping in the spring, and hopefully spring is just around the corner. So before you do your first mow, be sure to really walk around your property really, really well to check for, everything from ground nesting birds that often put their nests in a bit of high grass that you may plan on mowing. So really check that before you dig out your lawnmower. There's often nesting snowshoe hares, all kinds of things that could be living on your property that you're not even aware about, so do that good walkabout. We also get a lot of wildlife in due to construction. Spring and summer is a time when people put new roofs on their buildings and do huge renovation jobs, rip off old decks. So again, those are difficult situations because you need a new roof. So anything you can do to prevent them from nesting there to begin with, if you know you got a big construction job coming up, would be a very wise thing to do. Oftentimes people board up old buildings because they don't want anything entering, which is a good practice, but make sure before you board up an old building that there's nothing inside, that you're not trapping hundreds of animals inside. We just had a situation in in Cape Breton where there were probably over 2,000 birds boarded up into a building. And sadly, many of them died, but we were able to get some in and help them for sure. But if you're going to board up a building, be sure to check inside and then constantly check that building because animals may have found a way to get in and get trapped inside. It is a big problem, bigger than you realize.
I forgot I have a...
Yeah. And so that's some of the reason we get wildlife in. A few other things are we get them in because they've been shot. We get them on the X-ray table and we can see the bullets right in them. Electrocution is another thing that's quite common, especially with our birds, big birds of prey like our bald eagles. And habitat destruction or development is another reason. They're losing habitat like crazy. So we need to create habitats for them. That's why the natural gardens, the natural beautifications, giving wildlife a place to live, even the small little critters, it's so, so important. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is research, but George is back with another critter for you to meet. Okay.
All right. Critter number 2. I have to zoom in on this little guy. So this is Norman. Norman is an American kestrel. That is his name. He's not actually from America. That's the name of his species. He is the smallest species of falcon that's in North America. So falcons normally are really fast bird hunters and they take their prey out of the air usually. They're designed for speed. So little Norman here in a dive can do 100 kilometers an hour if you want to. Now, unfortunately for Norman, he came to us from the University of PEI when they used to have a wildlife rehabilitation program. He came to them with a dislocated shoulder. And unfortunately, sometimes birds pick at their wounds and he would pick at it. And in order to save him from possible infection, taking his life, they amputated his wing. And fortunately for us, he is a great education animal for us. And he seems to want to look at me more than does he. Have a good look at him. So interesting fact about Norman is because he is so small, he only weighs about 100 grams. He normally doesn't eat birds, which is odd for a falcon. Even though most falcons are really, really fast, even the slowest pigeon will go faster than a cheetah. They need the speed. His diet consists mostly of very, very small invertebrates, very small mammals, and lots of insects. So he supplements his diet normally with insects. He's not going to do, obviously he's not catching a pigeon. I think the pigeon would beat him up, to be brutally honest. So what does that mean for him as far as human activity is concerned? Well, because he's eating so many insects, one of his big problems is going to be insecticides in urban areas. The average amount of insecticides used by homeowners in urban areas is about 10 times what farmers use on their fields. So over a lifespan of him eating insects that have insecticide in them, it's going to build up in his system. It's going to cause him a lot of problems. it makes him actually reproduce less than normal. So urban species of kestrels struggle a lot. They struggle because they hunt during the day. In the daytime, there's not a whole lot of food out for them, so they can struggle to find food in the daytime in the cities. And the insects that they do eat tend to have really, really high concentrations of insecticides in them. So hopefully someday we can figure out how to keep the insects out of our houses without having to poison everything around us. So that's Norman. Coolest fact about Norman is all falcons have what we call a tooth in the top of their bill. It's designed to let them crack the spine of their prey. Most birds of prey have no qualms whatsoever about eating their captured prey live. Falcons don't want to do that. Most falcons, because they're built for speed, have very, very light, very delicate feathers that break very easily. So they don't want to spend a whole lot of time wrestling with their prey because they don't want to damage their feathers, because that could be a life-threatening condition if they're not able to fly anymore. So falcons have evolved over the years to kill their prey immediately when they catch it, so they don't have to worry about getting damaged feathers out of it. So he has one tooth in the middle of his bill. You can't see it though, but he does have a tooth. Kind of like a can opener in a way. Cool. Let's say goodbye.
He's one that likes to go to the school systems a lot. Back to here. And how's our time? We're doing good. So the third part, so we did education, rehabilitation, and the third goal that we have here at Hope for Wildlife is research. And that comes in a lot of different forms. A lot of you might not realize that, well, probably most of you know by now, but we have a H5N1 variant of the avian influenza that is here in Nova Scotia, sadly. And it was actually our facility that received the phone call on the goose that we went and gathered. And thank heavens we were following really strict PPE controls. So everything, as soon as that goose come in, we knew something was terribly wrong. He was set up in isolation and he died overnight, sadly. We sent him away immediately for necropsy to the University of Prince Edward Island. And they detected the flu, but they didn't know which strain. So it was sent off to Winnipeg. And the test results came back as the H5N1. And that was the first wild bird to be detected with that, about 1.5 months ago. For this time around, we certainly had it in the environment before. But so I think a lot of the work at a wildlife rehab center is really interesting. We've actually got papers published, one just recently on the a particular virus that was only ever noticed in skunk populations before. And we started seeing something similar in our porcupines. And we were able to do necropsies on the ones that didn't make it and determine that it had jumped from skunks to porcupines. So a lot of really good data comes from the work we do, a lot of good research over the years. When we first started and we get in a poison bird, we weren't really sure how to fix that. And now we know what drugs to give, how to treat the bird. Same as turtles with broken shells. When we first started in wildlife rehab, it was thought to be okay to simply glue that shell back together with epoxy glue, give a long-term antibiotic and get them out to the wild. It's now been proven that that's not the right thing to do. You need to actually let that shell grow back together. So what used to take 2 weeks for an injured animal can now take up to 6 months, but it's the right way to do it. So it's a very new science. We're learning new things every single day. And through the work that we do and the necropsy work, we're able to discover a lot of really interesting things about our natural world. A lot of things about zoonotic diseases, which are things that can be transferred to humans, and also what things can be transferred from species to species. So Hope for Wildlife Society was founded in 1997, although I did start a couple of years before that, but it took a couple of years to get our permitting in place. And that 40,000 is not correct. It's probably about 70,000. I meant to change that and I forgot. It's up to about 70,000 mammals have gone through, over 250 different species. That's a lot of different types of animals that we've seen over the years. Of course, the best part of what we do is the release of these animals to get them back into their natural world. I have this slide in here just to remind me to mention one question we do get quite often is, why don't we focus all of our work on endangered species? And I really feel strongly that it is important to address nature as a whole. I think we would solve a lot of our problems with endangered species if we were more focused on the entire ecosystem. We all know that the more different species there are, the healthier the ecosystem, not only for humans, but for mice and bald eagles and everything in between. So we also want to teach our young people that all of nature is important. It's all connected. We need every bit of it to be healthy. Our very being depends on a healthy ecosystem. So I really do feel it's incredibly important to send that message out that all of nature is important. And the perfect example is if you look at the passenger pigeon, there were 5 billion of them less than 125 years ago. And just through human thoughtlessness, really, we now have none. The last one died, I think it was 1910. And you know, it just shows you that even though something that's really plentiful, it can go extinct just like anything else. This is just a release we did a couple of weeks ago. One of our volunteers returning a beautiful barred owl to his home turf, and there he is flying free. So it's a beautiful photo. Yeah. So there. I think George's going to bring up one more animal for you to meet. But if anybody would like to, if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, I'd love to answer them. I don't know if anything's coming in on the chat or not. Anybody got any questions at all? Another question that we get quite often here at Hope for Wildlife that I love answering is, you know, people say, aren't you really interfering with nature? And I love that question because number one is 99% or 98% of the animals that we get in here at Hope for Wildlife are due to human-wildlife conflicts. And I feel it's really important that as a society, we take responsibility for our actions. And we want to teach our young people that if we've caused something, we have a responsibility to fix that. So 98% of what we do is caused by us. So I feel, you know, it's important that we give back to nature and fix that. But over the years, I've also learned that that answer isn't quite true because sometimes we do fix acts of nature, like a bad storm could come through. And if a dovekie gets blown up on the beach, we're going to try and help it and get it back out to nature. And I've come to terms with that because I look at it this way. Each and every day that we live our lives, we negatively impact our natural world, you know, by driving back and forth to work, using fossil fuels, you know, taking up valuable habitat, you know, everything we do usually has a negative impact. So I've really come to grips that it's okay to give back to nature. In fact, there comes a tipping point that we need to give back to nature and help whenever we can. So that's why the way we think about what we do in fact is a way of giving back to nature and helping it along. So, cool. So anybody have any other questions or anything they'd like to ask?
Yeah, we have some questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So Grace wants to know a little more about your staff members.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have a number of different tiers, like we have volunteers that sign up they come into the farm and work once a week. Some of them have been with me 25 years from the very start. And then we have interns, which sign up for like 16 weeks. And then we have paid staff. And usually we have about, when we started, we didn't have any. And now we're up to about 10 year-round paid staff. And in the summer, from our interns last year, we usually end up hiring about 20 of them, and they have a paid summer job here because they did their internship, they liked it, they learned the ropes, and then they come back the following year to work here. There's so many different things that you can sign up for too. Like we have help, you know, hands-on care, working in the nurseries, being a dispatch, going out on the road, picking up these injured and orphaned wild animals. We need help in accounting. We need help in thank you notes. We need help in our education facility. We need help in our gardens. The sky's the limit on how you can contribute and help.
We have another question in the chat from Mark and Emily. We're looking to reside/repaint our home. Is there a color that is more bird friendly than others? I have heard that the color green attracts woodpeckers.
That's a really good question. George, do you know the answer to that? I don't. I'm gonna do some research on that. That's a really good question. I wouldn't think so, but possibly, you know. Yeah, I'm always drawn to red. I wonder why. I have to check on. They say if humans wear red when they're working with wildlife, it's not a good thing. They see it in such a way that it makes them nervous. It may appear as a threat to some of our wildlife species. Don't know how much science is behind that, but I have read that in several different books.
We have more questions. We have a question from Mary. In late April, many people across the province will be participating in the Global City Nature Challenge for Day BioBlitz. To participate, people simply have to share photos or sound recordings with iNaturalist. Do you have advice that participants should follow, such as respect nature and there is no need to get really close to the critters? Recognize the limitation of your camera. Many people have expensive camera and can take photos from far away. Can't do this with a mobile device.
And I think that's really good. And I think anything that encourages people to reconnect with their natural world is a really good thing. And plus, using that caution, never chase an animal. Never, if you walk towards or see an animal, you should stay put and just see what you can see from where you're at. You know, if you're taking a trail through the woods, try and stick to the actual trail, because just going a little bit off trail can cause you maybe to step on a nest that you don't even know is there, or there might be an animal that has a burrow in that particular area. So being really respectful. In the winter, we see a lot of snowy owls come from the tundra down to Nova Scotia. And when they arrive, they're exhausted. They don't even really have the energy left to take flight and escape from a person if they approach them. So just because an animal doesn't leave doesn't necessarily mean it's okay with you sharing its space. So all of those things you mentioned in that question are really important. And yes, get a good lens for your camera, get out into nature, enjoy it, but be very respectful and very, very careful on how you approach the wild world. Oh. George, do you want to come over with your? I'll let George introduce his last bird here. I think your mute is on there.
All right.
Okay.
Last but not least, we've had a falcon, we had an owl, and now we're going to have a hawk. This is, all right. He's going to show you what his name is. There we go. Get a good shot of that. This is Chester. Chester is a broad-winged hawk. Hawks really come in two varieties. They come in the deep woods, very fast-moving variety, and they come in the high-soaring variety. And Chester here is the high-soaring variety hawk. So he has very, very broad wings, very, very long wings, which is where he gets his name from. And he uses those to glide on the updrafts. There are common birds in Nova Scotia, but they don't really live here all year round. They're migratory. They come up here to breed in the spring, and then they go home in the fall. And home can be as far away as central Brazil. It's an incredibly long journey. Now, you might notice something funny about Chester. He's not showing you his good side. He's showing you his funny side. Chester's missing an eye. So Chester came to us a number of years ago, probably after being hit by a car, and he lost his eye. So because he's only got one eye, Chester can't migrate home. It would be a little different for Ariel, the owl, if she only had one eye, because her primary means of hunting isn't vision, it's hearing. So you could probably release an owl without any other injuries with the missing eye. But for poor Chester here, his eyes are everything. Everybody knows probably at this point that there's a superhero named Hawkeye, the only one that doesn't have superpowers, weirdly enough. But he gets his name from a hawk's vision because he's has very good eyesight with his bow and arrow. Well, Chester here has very good eyesight. And the way I put it is, if Chester is standing on an 8-story building, at the top of an 8-story building, and he looks down, Chester can see an ant on the sidewalk. That's about how good Chester's vision is. But not if he's only got one eye. He's got great vision, but no depth perception whatsoever. So he doesn't really get to migrate home. His pattern for coming here is very similar to Ariel's in that he's going to want to take his food from the ground, more or less, since he's not one of those fast-moving deep woods hawks, which say, you know, a goshawk would be. He likes to glide as well. So he's going to be on the edges of rivers and fields, and he's going to swoop down and he's going to pick up his prey. So a lot of the birds we get like Chester come in for similar reasons to the owls. How you doing, buddy? How you doing? Now, Chester here is finicky. Broadwing hawks don't mate for life. Now the kestrels and the owls, they mate for life. Chester here, it's a one and done situation. So they come up here to breed and then they go home. So sorry, Chester, I had to give you a secret away. Before you go, show me your good side, buddy. There we go. That's what he looks like.
Cool. Okay, and I'm fine with more questions if you have time. I don't want to go past anybody's time, but if there's more questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, we have a few minutes and we also have more questions.
Good.
Grace want to know, I think I already read that. Lewis is asking, how are you funded?
It is all by fundraising. We're not government funded at all. So there's a lot of wildlife rehabilitation centers out there all across the world. And it is a struggle, there's no doubt. And we're very lucky that, you know, people will sometimes bring us in injured wildlife and they'll leave a donation. Sometimes corporations help us out with grants. We do a lot of grant writing and that kind of thing. We get things like food. During the pandemic, we had tons of eggs and chicken donated because there was a surplus on the market because restaurants weren't needing that as much. So there's all kinds of 1,001 different ways. Just people donating their time makes a big difference to keep us going. But it is a labor of love, and it's a little bit of probably what's the most worrisome thing of what we do is trying to make ends meet and coming up with the funding we need to keep going.
Mark wants to know, what's the rarest / most unique mammal or bird you have taken in?
It's funny because I almost added it to my slideshow today, and it was we had a brown pelican come up from after a hurricane, and it arrived in Yarmouth, and it was, no, that one actually arrived in Dartmouth, and we had two actually, but the one that made the news and had the most story behind it was a beautiful brown pelican named Ralph. And we wanted to get it back home, and that's where the story got really interesting because the paperwork and how difficult it was. We thought we could just put it on a plane and fly it back to the Carolinas, but it didn't work out that way. And we ended up driving it all the way back, which was so much fun, but it was a real neat experience. But through the years, we've had a lot of odd seabirds, and, you know, sometimes we get in so much species of birds that we don't even know what they are. So we have to look them up and figure out their care and what they eat and all those kind of things. So there's never a dull moment around here.
That's really cool. I was wondering, do you, when you release the animal after taking care of them and treating and making sure they're well, do you always take them back like to where they were found?
You know, we usually do, and it's important that we do. So when, say, for example, raccoons come in, we microchip them all because we get so many. So when it comes release time, we scan them. Every animal's keyed into our record keeping system. We know exactly where it came from, and they're returned to those areas. Birds of prey, it's quite important, especially with the barred owls who you met. They have very close-knit family units. They need to go back to their family. Now, sometimes with migratory birds, I don't worry about it so much, and I just might let them go from the farm because I know they're either going to head out on their migration. We are on a migratory path here. So, you know, I think it's not as important to put them through the stress of perhaps driving them for 4 hours in a car when they're just going to fly back anyway. So we do try to get almost everything back where it came from. It's a little bit more difficult when we have a lot of something like starlings and those kind of species, or red squirrels. Those are the two that are the hardest to return to where they came from, because we get so many.
So, yeah. Is there anything that we can do right now to show more stewardship for wildlife at home, like right now?
Exactly. I mean, there's so many things that, you know, sometimes the problem looks so grand that people get discouraged, and they think, how can my actions make a difference? And everybody's, you know, one little thing makes a difference. So, you know, whether it's, you know, not, you know, not overusing your natural resources, whether it's like for us, we were lucky enough to be able to put in a solar panel farm. And that's something that more and more Canadians and Nova Scotians are looking at. And you're moving away from fossil fuel and you're going to a clean energy source. So that's just one little thing that you can do that is going to help the natural world. Your personal footprint, you know, how much you buy, how big your house is, all of those kind of things are important, you know, to try and not need so much, so that more space, more of our environment is left for the natural world. You know, just the little things, from being careful when you're out in the environment, caring about nature. You know, if you see something in distress, there's nothing wrong with calling a wildlife rehabilitation center, getting help for that animal, and teaching people natural respect, you know, in the day-to-day of living of their lives, for caring and taking care of our natural world is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do I become a volunteer?
So we have a website. It's hopefulwildlife.net. And if you go in there, there's a section under Join Us. And when people sign up, we usually join them with a group of almost 200 people. So they join onto our Facebook page, and you start off by reading a bit. You read about our manual, you learn things about us and what opportunities are there for you. And once you join, you'll see I'll be posting things like, there's a bird in a box and he needs to be picked up and brought to Hope for Wildlife. Well, maybe not, that's a poor example right now because we're in the middle of the avian flu, but there is, you know, in the spring, there's a squirrel to pick up that's been injured by a cat. There's, you know, a fawn, you know, that's been hit by a car, and somebody needs to go pick it up and bring it into us. Or I might post, we need help at Hope for Wildlife today. We're really short-staffed. Can anybody come in and help out for the day? So it's really just a matter of watching that, seeing what you can do to help us. Might be, hey, we've got our open house coming up. Would you like to come help clean for the day to get us ready? Or our gardener needs some help in the gardens and she'd really appreciate your help. Is anybody available to come help today? So there's, you know, or we're short in education. Would you like to come in and we'll show you what to do, and we can get you to teach the public about our hospital and what it's like to you know, what it's made up of and how it all runs. So it's a really good way to get to know us gradually and slowly. We do ask for, you know, at least twice a month commitment. And if you can afford that and have that time available, we really can use the help. There's no doubt about it.
Great. I will look into that. Thank you.
Good. We'll look forward to seeing you. So.
Folks, is there any more questions? I think we're on time. Thank you, Dr. Swinimer and George, for a great talk. And folks, if you don't have any question, then we'll leave it there for now. But if you have any more questions, we will definitely make sure you get Dr. Swinimer email. And if you're not following Nature Nova Scotia or Hope for Wildlife on social media, definitely do, and check out their website. We will be back in exactly a month, the first Tuesday of next month, which is April, and we will be continuing to talk more about making Halifax a more bird-friendly city and what we can do to make that happen. So tune in, it's gonna be great. Thank you so much, Dr. Swinimer and George, for being with us tonight. Great presentation, and I learned so much about wildlife rehabilitation and how I can be a great steward for wildlife. Thank you, folks, for tuning in tonight. We will let you go. Have a good night.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. You take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.